Good day, my name is Michael Malondo and I'm going to present on the subject of Psychological Counseling 3, which is PC30S3. The presentation will be divided into two parts. The first part is with regard to preparation for the exam, and I'm going to give you some practical guidelines, some tools that you can use in order to prepare for your examination before and then also during the exam. And then the second part of this presentation is going to look at the content of the subject, where I'm going to cover the subject. Now remember, the purpose of this presentation does not replace the fact that you have to go through the whole subject. So it is still required from you to read the whole chapters, the whole books, in order to have a contextual understanding on what the subject is all about. So as I said, the first part is going to look at the preparation, so before and then also during the exam. The first thing that you have to remember is when you are going to write the exam, you have to make sure that you are ready and you are prepared. 2 months before you're going to write the exam, preferably, advisably, draw up a timetable. This timetable will only help you to prepare you for the examination. And there are 3 things that you have to do. The first thing is to read through all your subjects, through all your chapters, in order to understand. And while you are reading through your chapters and your subjects, make notes, make a circle, make keywords. You can underline certain concept, and as you're going to do that, then the third thing that you have to do is revision, to revise, and then you can use the notes that you have making to do the revision of the subject. Now, during the exam, when you have the exam paper in front of you, you have to make sure that there are 4 things that you have to do. The first thing is to read through the question, read through all the question, whether it's 5 or 6 questions, read through all of them. Once you have read through all the question, then you choose the 5 questions which you think you can answer, or which you can answer and which are easier to answer. Then thirdly is, after you have selected a question, read first through the question before you're going to write on your script. Then fourthly is answer the question. Don't interpret the question, answer exactly what is asked from you during the exam. And that will be very helpful, especially when you're going to do that. Now, the second part is we're going to look through the content. And as I say, this is just a scope, it's just a guidance to help you. It does not replace the fact that you have to go through the whole manual. You have to understand the subject and you have to read through all the chapters. Now, the first thing is when we look at counseling, we look at what we call grievance counseling or bereavement counseling, whatever you counsel. What do you do when somebody is in grief because of death? Somebody is in grief because this person has lost a loved one. What type of counseling will you use? And this is where bereavement counseling plays a very important role. So you can define what is grieving counseling or bereavement counseling. What does it entails? How do you apply it? Who can benefit through this bereavement counseling? What are the advantage or the disadvantage of this bereavement counseling or the grieving counseling? And then also you can also discuss is what role does the counselor play during this counseling session, and how can a counselor actually assist the counselee or the client to go through the grieving process. And there are different stages of counseling somebody that's grieving, and so you have to discuss these different stages or what is entailed in grieving counseling, which is part of your bereavement counseling. Then we're going to look then the human behavior, and human behavior is one of the most important aspects in HIV/AIDS. because most infection are being done because of human behavior. So discuss human behavior. You can also mention on the humanistic or the human behavior theories. You can link it. You can look at different aspects of human theory, human behavior theory, behaviorist theory. You can also link into that. You can define it. So it's very important that when you are going to discuss the human theory, that you can also then give practical example, different types of behavior, risky behavior, what makes certain behavior more risky than others. How can you have behaviors that are actually there that can protect you against HIV infection? So these are all the things that you can actually discuss within the human behavior. Then, of course, there is counseling, and counseling with regard to high-risk groups. High-risk groups, for example, you have the sex workers. You have men that are having sex with men. You've got the transgender. So you first need to define what is a high-risk group. Why do we call them a high-risk group? People that are like the truck drivers are also high risk group, which means this group of people are actually where they are, the environment where they operate or where they stay make them a very high risk. So whatever they do, they are actually becoming a high risk group. So you have to define what the group is all about, what make them risky. What behavior make that this group is risky. So you have to discuss that also in detail. And when you're going to counsel these people, what type of counseling are you going to use? So discuss it also in detail in your submission or in the answering of your question. So this is something that many people are actually ignorant, because they think counseling high risk group is the same like counseling people that are not high risk. Many of the high risk group are in denial. So how are you going to overcome that stage or that denial stage or mentality within these people? So you have to discuss this in detail, which is very, very much more important. Then, of course, when you are going to go counseling, every counseling needs to be supervised and mentored. Just being a counselor and having theoretical knowledge does not make you a good counselor. What makes you a good counselor is the practice. It's the experience that you have, and those experiences are actually lessons that you can learn. And then the lessons that you can learn is how can you help young upcoming counselor to help them. And as part of helping young upcoming counselor, they need to be supervised. And the reason of supervision is just to protect them, because many young upcoming or a young upcoming counselor does not have a clue on the practical setting. So and this is why when you do counseling and you go into advanced counseling, once you, as part of your practical, as in the practical counseling session, you will have somebody that will supervise you, that will advise you, and that will also guide you. And then with the supervision, there is mentoring, which only seems that he becomes your personal mentor, your personal trainer, the personal coach that can help you how to conduct your counseling and be the best counselor ever. So it makes it very much more important. So in your submission or your explanation or your exam, you have to explain about what is supervision, what does counseling supervision entails. You can read the different activities, the different action, the different things that you have to do in counseling supervision. Then, of course, mentorship. How are you going to mentor someone? What are you going to do? What are you going to look at? What does counseling mentoring mean? So discuss it in detail so that whenever you are going to write about it, that whoever's going to mark your paper will know that you have an understanding on the content. And as I said earlier also, that you have to read your manual, study manual, and you can also read other resources just to have a comprehensive understanding on what counseling is all about and what it entails and so on. Then, of course, you've got then the whole difference between a professional counselor and a community counselor. So you have to give the difference. What is a professional counselor? What is a community counselor? Or the other word for a community counselor is also a lay counselor. What is the difference? And you can read the difference when it comes to the qualification, their experience, responsibility, accountability, and the list goes on. So you will find that where there is no professional counselor, that community counseling can play an important role. You can also discuss, why do you need more community counselor than professional counselors, for an example. You can also explain, for an example, why community counselor needs to work together with a professional counselor. How can community counselor become a referral to professional counselors, for an example. So discuss this in detail also, so that it will be much more easier for you to explain what is needed with regard to these two. Then, of course, stigma and discrimination. It's very important. How are you going to avoid stigma? How are you going to avoid discrimination? In the sense where you find where you are counseling someone and you have the evidence or the presence of stigma and discrimination, whether it's the counselor towards the client, or whether the client is stigmatizing him or herself, or you have self-discrimination. So how are you going to make sure that you're going to avoid that? So in your submission, explain the difference. What is stigma? What is discrimination? How is this linked to psychological counseling? How can you use it, for an example? How can you discourage it, especially for those that are going through a counseling session? So discuss this in detail as much as possible. So those are, for an example, the content what you need to do with regard to examination. So as I say, it is still expected from you to go through everything, to read through this, and to know that you have a better understanding when it comes to the examination of this counseling session. So at this stage, I will encourage you to go through your study guide manual and to make sure that you are ready for the exam. And I hope you and I wish you all the best, and thank you for listening to me. Thank you.